Now, what we notice, picking up where we left off at, we'll look here at C. Now, we have four terms here, so that means we will use the grouping method. Now, with the grouping method, it basically goes like this. You will group the first two terms and factor out what they have in common, and then you will group the second two terms and factor out what they have in common. And if your factored parentheses are the same, then you know that this is factorable and you factor correctly. If it's not the same, then it either cannot be factored or you didn't factor correctly. So again, we group the first two terms. We can factor out a 5, and we'll be left with x plus y. We group the second two terms here, and we can factor out a positive x, and we'll be left with x plus y. These two parentheses are the same, so we'll write down one of them, and then everything that's on the outside of the parentheses will go in the second parenthesis, and we're done. Now we go here to this next trinomial. We have these three terms here. First thing we see if they have anything in common. They do not. So what we have to do here is list A, B, and C. We know our A is 3, our B is 7, and our C is 2. So we multiply A and C, which will give us 6. Our factors of 6 are 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. And then we add them together. We add 7 and we have 5. So now we will have 3x squared plus 1x plus 6x plus 2, because we substitute in 1 and 6, 1x and 6x for the 7x. We group the first two terms. We can factor out an x, and we'll be left with 3x plus 1. The second two terms, we can factor out a 2, and we'll be left with 3x plus 1 in the parentheses. The two parentheses match up, so our final answer is x plus 2 and 3x plus 1. And that is it. Now we come to example 2a. Now we have these two terms here. We factor. We could factor out a 7x, and we would be left with x squared plus 1. There's nothing more we could do with this. Now we go here. We have 5x squared minus 5x minus 30. We could factor out a 5, and we will be left with x squared minus x minus 6. Now we look inside here. We have nothing else in common that we could factor out. So we go over here and list our A, B, and C. A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is negative 6. So we know our A times C will give us negative 6. So we do the factors of 6, which is 1 and 6, and also 2 and 3. Now, since our A and C is negative and our B is negative, that means that the larger number is negative. Now, when we add these numbers together, this will give you negative 5, and then this one will give you negative 1. And remember, we were looking for a negative 1, so now we substitute. You add x squared plus 2x minus 3x minus 6. Now we group the first two terms. We can factor out an x, and we will have x plus 2. We group the second two terms. Now remember what I told you in times past, that when you're factoring, if the first term is negative, whatever you factor out must be negative. So we can factor out a negative 3, and that will leave us x plus 2. So our final answer, we bring down this 5, and we will write our two parentheses. We have x minus 3 and x plus 2, and we're done. Now we go here to C. We have 2x to the 4th minus 162. Now we can factor out a 2 here, and we would be left with x to the 4th minus 81. Now we look here, we have the difference of two squares. So we could bring down our 2, and we could bring down our two parentheses. X to the 4th, the square root of that is x squared. We know we'll put plus in one parenthesis and minus in the other, and the square root of 81 is 9. Now if we look here, this is the difference of two squares, so we're not done yet. So we have 2 parentheses x squared plus 9, And then we will have to do 2 more parentheses. So the square root of x squared is x, and we know x will go in both parentheses. A plus in one and minus in the other. The square root of 9 is 3. And we're done. Okay, now we come to D. We have 4 terms here. We could do our grouping. We could factor out an x here, and we'll be left with y minus 7. Now we group these last 2 terms here. The only thing they have in common is a positive 3. And we will have y minus 7. Now in one parenthesis, we will have x plus 3. And in the other parenthesis, we'll have y minus 7. And we're done. Now we scroll down here to E. Now we have 7y to the 4th plus 14y cubed plus 7y squared. We could factor out a 7y squared. And that will give us y squared plus 2y plus 1. Now, we look here, we cannot factor anything else inside this parenthesis. Now, we can list our A, B, and C. A is 1, B is 2, and C is 1. So now we have our A and C, which will give us 1. And the factors of 1 is just 1 times 1. And you know, if we add them, that gives us 2. So we will have y plus 1y, well, actually y squared plus 1y plus 1y plus 1. We group these first 2 terms, and we could factor out a positive y, and we will be left with y plus 1. Now we look here at these next 2 terms here. Now, the only thing that 1y and 1 has in common is 1. But remember, you are supposed to factor out 1, especially if it's the second 2 terms. So you factor out a positive 1, and that would just leave us y plus 1. Now our final answer, we have y plus 1, and we'll bring down our 7y squared. Now if you notice, both of these parentheses are exactly the same. So we could rewrite it. We'll still write our 7y squared, but in this, we'll write y plus 1 in the parentheses, and we will square the parentheses, and that's it. Now, we go here to F. Now F, we have 16x cubed, 28x squared, and a minus 30x. Now the only thing that it seems that they all have in common is 2x. So that will leave 8x squared plus 14x minus 15. Now we have nothing in common here. So what we would have to do is we would have to list our A, B, and C. And I'm going to go up a little bit. I think that'll be a little better. So I'm going to list my A as 8, my B is 14, and my C is negative 15. So for some reason, this just keeps disappearing. So now what we would do is this here. We'll multiply our A and C. 8 times a negative 15 is a negative 120. Now we need to find the factors of the negative 120. And I'm going to write it down here because of lack of space. We have 1 and 120, 2 and 60, 3 and 40. We have 4 and 30. We have 5 and 24. We have 6 and 20. We have 8 and 15. Let's see. And we have 10 and 12. And these are the factors of 120. Okay, now, here's the thing. Our A and C is negative, but our B is positive. So that means all of the lower numbers are negative. And we look here. When we add these numbers together, we have to find what will give us a positive 14. It's this negative 6 and 20. So we would take 8x squared minus 6x plus 20x minus 15. We group the first two terms. Yeah, some of these had disappeared. So we group the first two terms, and we can factor out a 2x, and we will have 4x minus 3. Then we group the second two terms. We could factor out a positive 5, and we will have 4x minus 3. So our final answer here will give us 4x minus 3 and 2x plus 5. So it's 4x minus 3 and 2x plus 5. And that is the final answer here. Okay, now we scroll down. Okay, now we move to G here. We have 48x to the fourth y minus 3x squared y. Now what they have in common here is 3x squared y. Now in parentheses we will have 16x squared minus 1. Now we can factor this. We got 3x squared y. This is the difference of two squares. So we will have 4x and 4x minus in one plus in the other. Square root of 1 is 1. And this is the final answer. Now we go here to H. Now we have these three terms here. They have nothing in common. So we could go to the side. We have A is 1, B is negative 2, and C is negative 48. A and C is a negative 48. I got to do something with this 4 again. Just don't know why this keeps coming up like that, but that's fine. Okay, so now we need to find the factors of 48, which is 1 and 48, 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12, let me see, 6 and 8. These are the factors of 48. But since A and C gave us a negative and B gave us a negative, that means that the larger numbers would be negative. Now, the one that would give us a negative 2 is this 6 and negative 8. So we have x squared plus 6x minus 8x minus 48. We group the first two terms, we can factor out an x, and we'll be left with x plus 6. We group the second two terms here. Since our first term is negative, we'll factor out a negative. We'll factor out a negative 8, and that will leave us x plus 6. So our final answer would be x minus 8 and x plus 6. And we're done with that problem. Now we scroll down here to I. We have 90x squared, 15xyz, and 50y squared z squared. The only thing they have in common here is 5. So we will have 18x squared, we will have 3xyz, and we will also have a minus 10y squared z squared. And this is it. There's nothing more we could do with this problem. Now we go to J here, 80x squared minus 45. The highest number that they have in common is 5. So we factor out a 5, and then that would give us, what's that, 16x squared minus 9. Now we know this is the difference of two squares, so it'll be 5 times 4x plus 3 and 4x minus 3. And that is it for J. Now we come down here to K. What we have here in K, they all have a 2b in common. In parentheses, you have x squared plus 22x plus 12.